Samsung is often first to market with the big new flagship phones of the year, and the same was true of 2024. At the top of its range is the Galaxy S24 Ultra, but the question is, 6 months later, is this still top of the Android pile? I'm Cam Bunton from Trusted Reviews. We've had this phone since launch, so let's find out. Now, usually when top phones introduce new features, they're copied pretty quickly. But even 6 months after launching the S24 Ultra, there's still nothing quite like the display on this phone. I've tested pretty much every other flagship phone launched this year in the UK, and this Gorilla Glass armor on the front of Samsung's biggest premium phone is the real deal, and for a couple of reasons. Firstly, and you're probably tired of hearing about this by now, but that anti-reflective quality is a game changer, genuinely. Not only does it mean that bright direct light on your screen doesn't disrupt your viewing as much, it also means that generally the display doesn't need to be all that bright to be visible, even when the ambient light levels around you increase. It also helps with viewing angles, again, just ensuring that any graphics are visible all the time. Even when the display is off in standby mode, there's a noticeable difference in surface color compared to any other phone. Where most will be reflecting light from any light surfaces like ceilings and walls to make them appear greyish, the Samsung is much darker, and bright light reflections, even spotlights, don't spread as far on the surface. It's really impressive. Add that to the fact that this is a pin-sharp Quad HD panel with great vibrant colours, contrast and really high peak brightness, and it's easily the best display on any smartphone to date. At least, in my mind, it's no contest. Now, the second advantage of that Gorilla Glass on the front is its durability. Now, ever since I first got this phone, I've been using it caseless. Every time I pick it up to use it again and revisit it as a daily driver, again I use it without a screen protector and without a case. Plus, I've dropped it once. Now, looking at it, even closely inspecting the glass under the light, there's very little in the way of scratching or marks. That drop did leave me with the tiniest little scuff mark near the curve of the glass, but it's almost impossible to see most of the time. I've been really impressed with how it's held up with day-to-day use, even without really trying to be all that careful with it. I also think the titanium frame feeling so rigid and strong also helps its case here. It's generally just a really tough phone, and I have no doubt that after 6 more months of use, it'll still look good. If the condition of my nearly year-old iPhone 15 Pro is anything to go by, I can see this phone not having any trouble at all going beyond 2 or 3 years, and still looking pretty good after that time. But as great as some bits are, there are still elements of this phone I don't like, even after an extended period of using the phone and getting used to it, using it day in and day out. And despite the fact that it looks fantastic, those right-angled sharp corners are simply the worst. They're never comfortable, and although I can adjust the grip and change the way I hold the phone, there's still frequently times when the grip just naturally, unconsciously changes, and I find one of those right angles digging into my palm. It's almost painful at times. Add that to the fact that this is one of the widest phones available and one of the heaviest, and the grip fatigue can get real, especially with one-handed stretching and trying to balance that heavy device in the palm. Sometimes it feels like carrying an actual roof tile around. It's so unwieldy. Of course, I could add a case to soften those edges, and probably should, but then that increases the size further, making it larger, wider, thicker, and it just doesn't need that. Now, another thought I've had after an extended period is around the S Pen. Now, in my younger years, I'd have lauded the S Pen and said how wonderful it is, and to an extent, it's still very useful. I just haven't found myself reaching for it all that often. If I have reached for it, typically it's to give my hand a break from the fatigue that comes with holding and using this massive phone. And maybe that's not really a negative that I don't see the S Pen as a primary use method, but it still is quite good having it as a backup. And the most useful feature for me personally is that I can use it to mark up screenshots and maps, quickly scribbling notes or directions, circling items, highlighting them, and then sharing them. It's much easier and more precise than trying to do the same thing with a finger on the screen. So maybe I would have liked to have more use cases for it and made the full use of the S Pen, but I'm quite happy with it being a backup tool. And the fact that it's built right into the phone and I don't have to carry it separately is a bonus. Similar to the S Pen though, Galaxy AI is another feature I haven't found myself using all that often. If there's one big buzzword in tech this year, it's AI, and you can thank Samsung partly for that. It's baked a suite of intelligent features into its phone software and labelled it Galaxy AI, and as useful as a lot of it potentially could be, I have mostly ignored it. And this is very much a personal thing, because as someone who writes scripts and reviews, writing to me is a form of personal expression. It comes from myself. And to hand any of that process, whether it's checking tone, summarizing, condensing, or any of that stuff over to something or someone else, just feels like cutting off part of my own process that I actually get enjoyment from. And crucially, it stops it from being my words. So any of that summarizing and tone checking stuff I just haven't bothered to use because I feel like it's not me if I use those services. And I've spoken of my frustration with some of the photo editing features included in a previous Samsung video, but the eraser and generative tools don't seem to work as effectively or usefully as Google's do that are built into Google Photos. Things like replacing objects with generative AI items instead of just removing them is not useful to me at all. I am curious to hear your thoughts on AI though. Let me know in the comments down below and I'll reply and read them as and when I can. The major positive though about Samsung software is that when security patches and updates roll out, Samsung is pretty quick to deliver them to phones, especially these top models. And with this phone, you're going to keep getting them for 7 or 8 years down the road, if the phone is still alive and well at that point. And as much as I do still have some frustrations with One UI on top of Android, there's a lot to like that's built in. The quick settings tile, for instance, is far easier to use thanks to the smaller, neatly arranged grid of icons than what you'll find on the Pixel phones. In a pinch, you can even use this phone as a PC if you have no other option. But let's move on. And while I think Samsung's cameras aren't perfect as an entire package, it is a very strong system. The makeup of lenses on the S24 Ultra does make it one of the best all-rounders in most conditions, at least if you don't want to have to think too much about how your photos turn out and just want to point and shoot. Aggressive HDR for the most part takes care of contrasting light conditions, evening out highlights and shadows, while the color saturation ensures images have a little pop. And it has to be said, the colors are tamer than they have been in previous years or what you'll find on the cheaper models. Samsung does still have that tendency to over-egg them slightly, especially in the skies and any greenery in the scene. Even overcast, cloudy skies look blue when they don't in real life. And at nighttime, there's a green tint to everything that makes everything green look really hyper-real. But the important thing is that you can load up the camera, switch between focal lengths easily, moving between ultra-wide, primary, and then zooming pretty far, and you know that when you push the shutter button to capture, the photos will be consistent across the array of sensors and lenses. I still think Samsung needs to tone down the processing of detail, especially once you get to the zoom camera, because in an effort to make images seem sharp, it seems to color in details, adding contrast and losing all the texture, to the point where lots of detail just doesn't look natural at all, especially in objects like trees, branches and bushes or things like that. Now in the end, when I look at the entire experience of the S24 Ultra, I'm still of the opinion that if you want the best balance of everything from display to software support, build, durability, camera and performance, the Ultra is still the Android phone to get. Sure, you might find a phone that does some of the camera experience better, or you might find a phone with longer battery life, or you might find a phone with better, more consistent, speedy performance. But I don't think you'll find a phone that does all of it as well as the Samsung does. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Am I completely way off? Or you can get me on social media if you want. I'm at Cam Bunton. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap that notification bell, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.